A lot of people are like, well, I don't want them to have a problem in our FEC. No, I don't either, right? But that's
Right,
not
right.
the real world we live in.
Hi, I'm Russ, and this is the Memory Makers Podcast, the show that helps you create amazing customer experiences and make more memories. Dun 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 dun, Memory Makers Podcast. I've got a Law and Order intro for us because I'm not joined by Danny today. I'm joined by none other than Mr. Scott Harvey. How are you, Scott?
I'm doing great, Russ. How are you?
I'm fabulous and keeping the skis pointed downhill. So for those of you who have not had the pleasure of hearing Scott Harvey speak and knowing his background, there was a reason why I picked the Law and Order theme song for our jingle this episode, because Scott comes to us as a wonderful background in bona fides, was in law enforcement and the communications officer and a DARE officer for years and years. And so it was a little nod and tip of the cap for that background. But for Scott, for those who haven't had a chance to come across some of your content, to give us a little bit of a background on where you come from and what you're doing now, and that will kind of tee up our focus for today on critical communication.
Yeah, so I live in central Kentucky, right outside of Lexington, right in the heart of bourbon country, and lived here for my whole adult life. I came down here to go to college from Ohio, came down to EKU, to Eastern Kentucky University, to study police administration, because I always knew I wanted to be a police officer. And so there's no degree required to be a police officer, but you can't be a cop till you're 21. You graduated 18. By my public school math, that gave me 3 years to do something with my life. So I went ahead and got a 4-year degree, and got a degree in police administration, got hired on by a city here in central Kentucky, and wasn't in that capacity long as a patrol officer before I really started trying to get prevention focused. So I got trained very early on in the DARE program, went into the classrooms 1 day a week to teach 5th graders and 7th graders. And around that same time, I also got trained as a hostage negotiator. Now, I did all of my training through the FBI. It was FBI tactics and strategies and all of that stuff. But I did all of my work in city law enforcement. So I spent 20 years as a hostage negotiator, a DARE officer, a public information officer. So anytime there was media releases, media interviews, they all came through me. I did hundreds of media interviews. And I supervised school resource officers. So I was in schools all day, every day for my job. And then around 2010, I started being asked to do some conference presentations. So I did a couple of those. Those turned into school assemblies. And that turned into the gig that I could retire into in 2018, when I was able to retire after 20 years on the police department. So since 2018, I've been a full-time speaker. I've got a mastermind that I facilitate. I do communication consulting, spoken at 360, done a ton of work with Creative Works, huge fan of what you guys do. And so that's kind of the 30,000 foot view of who I am and how we got here today.
I love it. Well, and we've benefited. So, as you mentioned, Creative Works, we've had you come in and work with our leadership team, but also and also just having done your storytelling distillery or storyteller. I'm
Story Distiller.
Thank you. Story Distiller
Gotcha.
was wonderful. And because everything that I've heard you speak on, it's how do we get out of the way of ourselves and some of the self-inflicted wounds that can come from poor communication and the tendencies of human nature and the lizard brain sometimes that takes over, that creates small problems turning into bigger problems than they otherwise should.
Yes.
As well as how do we show up as a human first for the people around us and get a win-win situation, whether it's a disgruntled staff member trying to, fix something, whether it's a guest that comes into a family entertainment center. And while we were at the Story Distiller event, we had a couple of other FEC operators that were there. I know that you've gone and spoken at different FECs to the staff and doing all of that. So I love that you're getting more and more immersed into the niche of out-of-home entertainment. And we have way more fun than we deserve getting to do what we do. But love what you bring to the table with your mindset and your background for sure.
Well, thank you. I would love having you and my FEC friends at the Story Distiller event. This is the first event I've ever hosted. I've spoken all over the country, but never hosted my own event. But honestly, it was modeled mostly after 360.
Well,
Because the 360 event is top notch. If you've not been to 360, and Russ isn't paying me to say this, unless he wants to send me a check, then I'll take it. But
I got you.
It's a top notch event. You're not going to find a better event out there that's jam packed with information, with networking, with all the things you need to do your job better.
I appreciate that. A lot of love goes into it, and a lot of love went into yours as well. And I highly recommend it, just because as we try to really find fulfillment in what we do, a lot of that, a lot of people are drawn towards, how do I get this message or need that we as a company need to have internally or with people beyond? How do we get this to really connect and people to buy in and have a want, of their own accord to be a part of what we're trying to do? And that was some of the things that were so, beneficial when you came and spoke to Creative Works team of, people have to know how much you care before they care how much you know, and so many assets of that. And you are also a published author with this fabulous book called Silence Kills that I've read a couple of times, and have always been like, it's just such a great go-to in order to have it. I know that a lot of love and time and effort went into you putting that book together. And there's some things that I wanted to just dive in on from the book, as well as just at-large pieces from your experiences as we talk about, what is kind of the fundamental problem that comes with a lot of miscommunication? What are some solutions then that we find that go with it, and some of the tactics that then we can use to be better communicators? So with that kind of laying up, in what you've seen, across the corporate and the civil discourses, what are some of the problems that you see fundamentally happen again and again with poor communication?
I think one of the biggest issues today, and the reason the book is called Silence Kills, is because when we have a crisis, and let's be honest, we have them every day. If the crisis is big enough, we tend to shut down communication, because it's not because we hate people or we're mad or frustrated. We are honestly afraid of saying the wrong thing. We live in a cancel culture world where if I say the wrong thing, land on the wrong side of the issue, whatever, I'm going to get canceled. And so it feels safer to say nothing. But the problem that I've unpacked in the presentation and in the book is silence without rapport feels like we don't care. So if I am on your team, if I'm an employee of your FEC, or if I'm a patron, a customer of your FEC, and it's obvious to me there's a problem and no one's talking about it, the problem is I will fill in my own narrative. I will come up with some kind of a story to explain why things are off. Maybe I work there, my spidey sense is tingling, or maybe I know there's a problem and nobody's talking about it. That makes me question the integrity of my boss, of my team, whether I'm going to be working here long. My brain hates a vacuum and will fill in the narrative. It's so much easier to communicate your way through a crisis, to let people know, hey, we know this is going on. We're going to work on it. We're going to fix this because we want this to be the best place you've ever worked. Or customers, clients, we know we've had an issue in the past, but we are in the process of fixing it. We would welcome your input as to how you think we can make things better here, because that just tells everybody I'm aware, I'm trying to fix it, and I'm asking for your input.
Yeah. And there's perceived vulnerability there, which I think that whether it's ego or just the way that if we were brought up in a certain way where it's like, nope, we just put our head down and we go after it, it seems like it can be easier to just kind of muscle our way through that, as opposed to again, opening up what can be perceived as being vulnerable, but actually provides a lot of emotional jujitsu to help bring people in. And like you said, not fill in with, whether Brene Brown talks about, hey, people have a shitty first draft, or we're really bad at filling in gaps with accurate information, which you talk about in here of it's so easy if I have zero context that this is something that you are knowing about and caring about and working on. We're gonna go down the dark side of the force as far as what we're assuming intention is. And that then creates a whole ripple effect and noise that we then also have to combat when we do come to the table, to show that something's been resolved. So are there, and there are different ways, in our landscape today, just with when we're more connected than ever, it's easier to kind of put your foot in your mouth because we just assume, hey, I can just put out a post on this, or I can just do a this or a that. What are some of the things that you're seeing with the different, whether it's social media or just kind of default ways to engage with folks? How do we keep these small things small in the moment, besides, acknowledging and apologizing and showing that we're going to be doing something? Like, what are some of the better ways to go about doing that through social media and engagement with our constituents?
Yeah, I love social media. For an extrovert like me, it's my crack. Like, those people need me. Like, I need to engage there, and they feed me and all of that stuff. But we have to be aware with social media. It's a very fast-paced environment, and every day there's a new tragedy that we feel like we should weigh in on. And I'm going to tell you to not, at least right away. Give time. It feels like we have to say something right away. You don't. And you need to ask yourself, is this even on brand for me? Is this a pertinent topic for me as an FEC owner operator to be even talking about on my corporate social media? Now, on your personal social media, some people are like, well, I have the green light there. Maybe, because if I'm an employee of your team, or if I'm a customer of yours, I probably am a follower of yours online. I'm the FEC following, and then possibly the owner if I've had a conversation with you. So if I see the owner or the employees being off brand on their personal social media, then it makes it hard for me to kind of come in there and feel like I'm welcome, or you support me. So be real careful weighing in on some of these things. And also, when somebody roasts you, blasts you, puts you on blast, whatever, on your social media, I tell corporations all the time, this is what people do today. You can either engage and the flames will get bigger, or you can post one time. And I highly recommend that post back to that person is, I'm so sorry you had this experience. Please call us at this number so that we can address this with you. Because that tells the social media world, hey, they saw this, they're engaged, and they're going to fix this. They're just not going to do it in the public square of social media in front of you, right? It shows that I'm responsive, but I want to make this better for you. Would you please call me? Would you please stop by the FEC on this certain day, and we'll talk about this, because I want to make your experience the best experience you've ever had. Those are the type of posts. And when they come back on, if they're still blasting you, I'm just not replying back.
Yeah. Well, I love that approach because it does a couple of things. And in the book, you talk about this, and you've also, I've had the benefit of hearing you elaborate on it even further in a number of presentations where there's this balance, right? This teeter-totter that you go through, where there's this balance between logic and emotion. And when emotion is high from a poor experience or a perceived slight or whatever that thing is, that perception is their reality. And they need to be able to, vent and get that out. And you don't want that being in the public square portion. Like, initially it can start there, but to then redirect it in a little bit more of a controlled environment, allowing them to express all of that. So that way then the teeter-totter can come down. So then they'll be ready to, move forward with some sort of a logical fix to the problem. Yes. But a lot of times, some folks just need to be heard first when it comes to that. Not some folks, almost all of us, right? I mean, that is, I need to, get this off because it was real for me, and I was mad, was mad about it. And so I the verbal processing of that needs to be able to take place. So that way, then our brain is attached a label and a framework to it. So it's not just at such a high, it's not redlining in the emotional state with that. And I think that's one of several different types of tactics and approaches that you would recommend. What else should we be looking at when we're trying to de-escalate tension? Some different ways to let people know, hey, I really do hear you, and here's how I want to acknowledge that. Here's how I want to be able to move forward and help make this right for you.
Yeah, I think especially if you're talking to somebody face to face, and that's my ideal way of talking to somebody. If somebody has an issue, hopefully they bring it to your attention while they're there. That's the best case scenario. And so when you're engaging with somebody, you are doing active listening skills. You are making eye contact. You are smiling when it's appropriate. You are mirroring their emotions. You are nodding your head. You're encouraging them. You're asking them, please tell me more about this. Tell me about this. because you want them to keep talking. Because as you mentioned, the teeter-totter, when emotions are high, logic is low. So the more I let them talk, the more I let them get it out, emotions start leveling out and logic and reason start coming back up. And to your point, you don't have to solve their problem necessarily as much as you need them to feel like they've been heard. So you are encouraging them to keep talking. You are letting them know, I'm very sorry this happened to you. We are going to work on our end to make sure that this doesn't happen again, because this should not have happened in your experience. And we're going to fix this moving forward. I think you're encouraging them to keep talking. Now, the average FEC owner is burning the candle at both ends and just lit it in the middle as well. So they're busy people, right? And I know the pushback is, I don't have time. Like, I don't have time to sit and listen to their 30-minute story. Then ask yourself, do you have the time for the social media flame wars? Do you have the time for them to go and vent to their friends and turn their friends against your FEC? I think if you invest the time today to allow somebody to be heard, to allow somebody to talk to you unrushed, then you're building a relationship for the future. And a lot of people are like, well, I don't want them to have a problem in our FEC. No, I don't either, right? But that's not the real world we live in. And the nice thing is the hospitality industry has done studies on this, Russ. And what's fascinating to me is, like, if you stay in a hotel and that hotel meets 100% of your expectations, on a customer satisfaction survey, you'll give them about a 7. If you stayed in that hotel, you had a problem, you brought it to their attention, they addressed it and fixed it, research says you'll give them about a 9, which means if they 100% met your expectations, you're going to rank them lower than if they were responsive to your problem. So there's gold here. If we can be responsive to people's problems, allow people to be heard, and serve them that extra that they really didn't expect.
How do you recommend, so, if you're going out and speaking with an FEC and helping their staff, whether it's the internal side of communication or the external side facing with the customers and the guests, what are some of the additional, tactics or frameworks that you want people to be really cognizant of like, hey, here's some key terms or approaches that you want to be aware of and that you want to practice, because when those emotions are high, I know, back in the day, it was a struggle for me as a 17-year-old dealing with a party mom who was mad because we, didn't have the pizzas out on time, and she was rightfully justified with that. But the emotional maturity of me at 17, now at 38, isn't dramatically different, but, it was still a learning curve that I had to go through and learn how to handle some of those things. So what do you offer to advice for folks that, or whether they're young or old or somewhere in between? A lot of people just don't like conflict, and so it's easy to retract. So what are some additional things that you like to help folks keep in mind in de-escalating?
So I think one of the frameworks to remember is, if I say to myself, I'm in conflict, or I'm going to have an argument with this customer, I know this is coming, then I will find the argument there. I will find the conflict. If I just say, this customer and I need to have a discussion, that's a different framework for my mindset. And I'm a huge fan, Russ. I know a lot of the FECs employ this upcoming generation, and I'm a huge fan of them. I did school assemblies and worked in schools most of my career. So huge fan of these kids. And one of the things that they will bring to the table is their authenticity, hopefully. Be 100% you in these interactions with your clients and customers. If you are not funny, don't try to be funny. If you are not super serious and buttoned up all the time, don't try to be that. Just be real. One of the things I love is I'm an Apple guy. Like, if Apple makes a product, I'm going to buy it. And because if it has a problem, Russ, when I go to the store or when I call their customer support number, I get a real human who says real human things like, wow, that sucks. Should not be doing that, and we're going to fix it. Like, they're validating. They're not saying, I'm so sorry this has happened to you, while they're typing and reading from their script, right? They're having a real, genuine human conversation. And as we get more into the AI world, authenticity is going to be even more important. So when somebody comes to you with a problem and you're genuinely listening to them, and you can say something like, you know what? I was in an FEC as a kid and this thing happened, and I remember that they didn't resolve that problem, and I'm going to fix that for you so that you don't remember that 5-6 years later. I think those are the type things. I was in a Starbucks the other day going to a speaking gig and stopped to get a coffee, and the 17-year-old kid that was working there, he gets my coffee for me and he goes, "What's on the agenda today?" Which I thought was a weird thing for a barista at a Starbucks to say. And I'm like, "Hey, I'm heading to a speaking gig." And he's like, "Well, then you probably want a receipt for this. My dad, when he was out on the road, he took receipts to everything because he wrote it off." And I'm like, what a great interaction with a 17-year-old barista who didn't have to ask me what was on the agenda that day.
Yeah.
But could kind of tell, hey, I was heading to something kind of cool and had a conversation. Those are the things I would encourage your team members to do, to build those relationships, to ask the random questions, to high five the kids, to do all the things to, Walt Disney calls it plussing the experience. Give them more than they expected and listen longer than they expect you to their problems. As a negotiator, I never talked somebody into doing anything that I needed them to do. I listened them into it. Because the longer we listen, we can learn what is their motivation, what do they want out of this, what's a win look like for them, and then I can create a solution to the problem that checks as many blocks as possible for them. Maybe they're embarrassed because they know they've kind of shown their hind end here, for lack of a better term, and they know they've gotten a little bit out of control. So let's take this over someplace where we can talk, just me and you. Let's figure this out, right? Let's allow them to save some face. Let's start de-escalation. When I was on patrol, the louder somebody talked to me, the quieter I talked back to them. Now, not in a patronizing way, this is important, but to try to get that teeter-totter, that emotion to start coming back down. And that's what we want. So we can also hit them with our high emotion, and then neither one of us will ever come down.
Right.
And the best way to get them to start coming down is to listen.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things, two points that you talk about is being that authentic, being who, truly who you are, as well as listening, first as the primary tool. Sometimes people, especially when you're hiring and everything else, like those are things that need to be coached into, and expectations that are kind of set and an example shown, not only in the hiring process, but then also in the day-to-day, right? Where it's trickled down cultural economics, for lack of a better, term, where if they see, okay, these are things that we are bringing up and coaching in real time, and consistently throughout, and empowering our employees of, hey, ask questions. We never know what this other human being is dealing with before they came into our center, or if it's a fellow teammate. We always use the joke of like, man, that person must have gotten cut off on the way into the office or whatever, and they're tuned up about that, but it's getting its lane of expression through whatever this thing is that's in front of us now. Yes. And so assigning or not, saying like, you don't want to minimize the issue that's being brought in front of you, because in their mind at this moment, it is still very critically important to them. But so being able to listen to it, but also understanding this wasn't something that I personally did. I didn't come over and stomp on the foot of somebody that was in my center and saying, sorry about it, and then moving on, right. Kind of a thing. So especially when we're in the situation where we have to take responsibility for something that may not be directly our fault, but it's still, we as a culture care that people are coming here to celebrate and escape. And so the fact that something did happen is what we care and are sorry about. Like that's a huge part of the equation, and definitely helps people, again, stay cool, calm, and collect in those situations, talk a little softer, help that all come down, because you're also not trying to rush it out the door. Now, don't get me wrong. There are fun folks that are coming in there to abuse the system, and they're going to do that. And that's the cost of doing business. Yes. But we can't let that dictate all of the other things, for the people that do have genuine concerns and things that we want to be able to approach. And so that's always a tough balance. And
it doesn't have to be a crisis. I mean, that's what I kind of focus on, is crisis communication. However, it can be while somebody's waiting in line for the attraction and you just say, hey, best thing that happened today. What's the best thing that happened today? What's coming up this weekend? What you got going on? Just those type of interactions where you're not just saying, how are you? That kind of stuff. Because that's a dumb question. Like, how are you? Do you really want to know? You probably don't. Right. Right. So keep them positive focused while they're there. What's the best part of today? What's the best thing that's happened to you this month? Like, I love, building people up and getting people in that type of mindset while they're at your event, because emotion is such a powerful thing. Emotion allows us to remember things longer. And if you can start bringing emotion into the environment, people will remember it more fondly. They will remember it more clearly. And it's a powerful tactic to connect that emotion to that event. I've told you before, Russ, we're consumers of FECs. Like we're going to activate games. My son-in-law scheduled it. We're going in like a week and a half. He's put it on the family calendar. So we're all going. And as a consumer, like now that my kids are 24 and 19, like we have years of these memories from these FECs that are worth way more than whatever I paid for those events. And at one of the events, my daughter's best friend broke her wrist at our birthday party at an FEC. But they went above and beyond. They checked on her later. They got all the medical attention she needed. It was still a positive experience because kids fall, and that's to be expected. Don't treat me like I'm a criminal trying to sue your organization because my daughter's friend broke her wrist, right? Just come beside me, talk me down if I need it. Tell me we've dealt with this before, not a huge deal. We can fix this. Those are the type things that still make it a positive experience, and nobody was mad.
I love it.
Yep.
I love it. Well, we're coming up on Amusement 360 here in just a few weeks, and excited for you to be the keynote and bring in more of this and then some to the table. And for those of you who are wanting to see more of what Scott has to offer, I cannot recommend him enough. You can check out speakingofharvey.com and be able to invite him to come and speak with your staff. It's a huge impact. The folks that I know have had him come out there, it's moved the needle and it's moved it quickly. And it's one of those things that if you're looking for ways to elevate your staff and help them level up what they're able to do, not only for themselves, but for the guests that are coming through your doors, I highly recommend it. And be able to check out his books, Silence Kills. It's a phenomenal read, easy to read. It's like having a conversation with Scott. I've enjoyed this book and can't recommend it highly enough. And so we really encourage everyone, come check us out at Amusement 360, September 10th through the 12th. You'll be able to hear Scott speak there, but also check out speakingofharvey.com and pour into your team in a way that very few places have. And see just the blossoming results from that, because what the man brings to the table is very special. So, Scott, thank you so much for joining us here today. We're looking forward to diving in further as we go along. And thank you all so much for joining us. If you have any ideas for future content or episodes that you want to see us do more of, please let us know. If you like what you heard here today, a 5-star review, please and thank you, is always appreciated. And as always, big shout out to Mikey Mike on the ones and twos working the Ultranet for us, and we will see you on the next one, troublemakers.